Are you people able to hear me? Okay, cool. Fine. So today we'll talk about a new module, Spring AOP. Spring AOP. Here Spring AOP is one of the most important modules in Spring framework. Here AOP stands for Aspect Oriented Programming. AOP is basically a concept which I can say is actually complementary for object-oriented programming. AOP is complementary for object-oriented programming. AOP is used to address the cross-cutting concern issues. AOP is used to address cross-cutting concern issues. Okay, cross-cutting concerns. You got something called as cross-cutting concerns here. Okay, it's cross-cutting concerns. So, what are these cross-cutting concerns? Yes. What do you people think? What are cross-cutting concerns? Cross-cutting concerns means what? Yes. Cross-cutting concerns means, you can say that it is the common code, most common code, which is spread across the application. Okay, which is spread across the application. Here, for example, we got logging code. So generally, an application will log the events. Yes, that is the most common stuff which we'll be doing. In this logging code, it is spread across the application, right? Yes, you'll find it all over the place in the cross-cutting concern code. Okay, yes. So similarly, can you people give me another example here? Yes, for cross-cutting consent code, which is scattered or which is spread across the application, you can see. Yes. Yes. Okay, utility methods, transaction management, with the examples of cross-cutting consent code, logging, transaction management code, exception handling. So you find that this is the common code which is spread across the application, right? This is a common code which is spread across the application. Yes. So you'll find it all over the place in the application. So what's the issue with this code actually? What if it is spread across the application? So what's the issue? What do people think? Code with this cross-cutting concern. Oh, sorry, what is the issue with this cross-cutting concern code? What's the problem here? It is redundant. Yes, that's right. The first issue is redundancy. You'll find that this code is the most redundant code which is spread across the application all over the place. If the code is redundant, then you know what, maintainability will be an issue. Maintaining such redundant code will be an issue, right? Yes. So here you'll find that even the reusability will be an issue. Yes. Here that's the reason why you'll find that this AOP has been introduced to address this issue. AOP has been introduced to address this issue. How the AOP will address this issue? How the AOP will address this issue? So you'll find that whatever the common code you got, whatever the common code you got, that common code you see here instead of you see the code with the help of AOP we can contain it to one place and make sure that okay, we can just contain it or restrict it to a module. Okay, can contain that code from spreading across the application and write it in a single module at one place and configure it such a way that here it is applied throughout the application. Configure it such a way that it is applied throughout the application here. Yes. Okay. Here, how can we do this? Yes, that is what you learn here in the EOP. How to contain this cross-cutting consent code. Instead of spreading it, you can just write it in the module and apply it, or configure it in such a way that it is applied throughout the application wherever it is needed. Yes. For that, first of all, I'll show you an example. Let's consider an example here. Yes. So, first of all, you have to make a note of this. If you want to work with Spring AOP, you got some dependencies which you have to add. You have to add some additional dependencies. This is the list of dependencies which you have to add. 4 dependencies. Please make a note of it, all of you. Seriously, make note of it. Yes. Okay. So hope people have made a note of it. So these are the list of dependencies which you need to work with Spring AOP. Okay. Yes. Next, I'll show you an example. Let's say we'll consider this bean class, example service bean, which is created here. You got this method, right? What is it? A string method. So get string method. Get message, I'm sorry. You got this get message method, right? Yes. So you'll find that here, this method, okay, let's assume that it has got some business logic in it. Just assume that it has got some business logic in it. So you'll find that here, okay, I want to log this method calls. I want to log this method invocations here. Method invocations. Whenever this method is invoked, get message from the example service, you have to call this method. Okay, yes. Yes. We have to log that method details. Whenever this method is called, you want to log that method details. So generally, usual practices will do this. Logger. We can use a logger here. Get logger. Say example sense plus logger.info. Say get message method invoke. Yes, that's it. So here, see this way, as part of that method itself, you'll write this code. As part of that method itself, you'll write this code. Right? And you will do the same for all other methods. And you'll find that this becomes the most redundant code throughout the application, right? Yes. Here, but the thing is, I don't want this to happen. I don't want this to happen here. So I want to make sure that this kind of code is actually contained. It is not spread. We have to make sure that this code is not spread across the application. Okay, yes. How do we do that? How can we contain this code? So this is where the AOP will come into picture. Okay, yes. So we'll not write this code here as part of this method. Okay, get message. I'll remove this code. Instead, we'll write it in a different class. Instead, we'll write it in a different class. So just a second. Just a second. Okay. Here we'll write that kind of code in a class called as advice. Actually, here in AOP terminology, this kind of code is actually known as advice code. This kind of code is actually known as advice code, which code the cross-cutting concern code. Okay, the cross-cutting concern code in AOP terminology, it is actually known as advice code. Got it? It is actually known as advice code here. Yes. Here you'll find that you will be writing that advice code in this class here. You see, I'll define a class and I'll make it implements an interface which is provided by Spring AOP. You see, this interface is actually in Spring AOP. Okay, yes. We'll make this class implements this interface. Okay, and there is a method in that interface called as before. We'll override that method, and then we'll write that advice code or cross-cutting concern code in that method. Okay, yes. You see here in the method before advice interface, we got a method called as before, which will override, and in that method, you see, we are trying to write this code. Okay, yes, just a second. So, to this method, the details about that method will be passed. So, which method is involved? That method details are passed to this method before, and this method, you see, it can log those events. This method will be able to log those events here. You can see. Yes. Fine. You'll find that here. Whenever you call the method target method, whenever you call the target method, what is the target method here? For which method you want to execute that advice code? To the get message method, right? To the get message method, you want to execute the advice code. So you want to this method, you want to apply this advice code. I can say you want to execute that advice code. Okay, yes. So here, you see, we'll configure the details. How do we configure those details? So how is it possible? Actually, we are not calling this target method before anywhere in this method. But whenever this method is called, get message method is called, I want the target method to execute. Okay, yes. I want the target method to execute here. Oh, sorry, I want that advice code to execute. I want the advice code to execute. Yes. So how is it possible? This is where the proxies will come into picture. Okay, we'll use proxies here. I'll tell you in just a second. Yes. Just a second. Yes. Okay, you know what? Here we'll be configuring the proxy. So you'll find that here the proxy is actually an object which acts on behalf of another object. Proxy is an object which acts on behalf of another object, I can say. Yes. So we'll configure a proxy. I'll show you how to do that. So here, once the framework provides the proxy object for that target object. What is the target object? For which object methods you want to apply this advice code, you want to execute this advice code for the example service, right? The get message method is defined in the example service. Into the example service method get message, I want to execute the advice code. I want to execute the advice code, right? Yes. So here you see you'll find that from now on we will not call the example service method directly. Instead, we'll call this proxy objects method. You know, whatever the methods we got in the example service, you'll find that all those methods are also defined in the example service. All those methods are also defined in the example service here. Sorry, in the proxy object as well. Whatever the methods we got in the whatever the methods we got in the example service, you'll find those methods in the proxy also. Okay, you'll find those methods in the proxy also. So what you have to do is here, you will be calling the proxy methods. Let's say, if you want to call the example service method get message, so what you will do is you'll call the proxy object method get message. So proxy object method get message, you know what it does? It will check whether there is any advice code configured for this target object. If it finds that there is an advice code configured for this target object, and first of all, the proxy will make sure that it executes that advice code. And here, once that advice code or the cross-cutting consent code finishes execution, so the proxy will call the target object here. That is how it works. The proxy will call the target object. So the proxy object, the target object will be same type. They both will be of same type here. Okay. Yes. So where do we configure these details? How to create this proxy and all? Yes, that's the question now. So let me show you people how to do that. Okay. Yes. So here we'll configure those details externally in the XML file. You see, first of all, already we have configured these two beans, right? Example service is one bean, the ID is example service, and here the log advice also we have registered it as a bean itself. Yes. So here you'll find that this example service is called as a target bean or target object. So the target object means, you see, for this object's method itself, you want to execute that advice code, right? For this objects method itself, you want to execute the advice code. Advice code means what? The cross-cutting consent code. You see, for example, login code. Yes, is cross-cutting consent code. That is known as advice code here. Okay, yes. So here, you see, the advice code is defined in this class called as log advice. Okay, you can give any name to this class. It will not be log advice. Okay, yes. So the advice code here, it's defined in this class. In this class, you see, it implements an interface called as method before advice. So this indicates that the advice code which you define in this method before method, it will execute before the target method starts execution. Whenever the target method is called, see, before the target method starts execution, the advice code will execute. The advice code will execute here. That is how it works. Fine. Now, you see here, but you have to configure the advice code for the target object method. So how do we configure the advice code to the target object method? Yes, the details are here. You see, to configure the advice code to the target object method, we use this predefined bean class. Just check this regex method cut point cut advisor. Regex method cut point cut advisor. Okay, yes. This is the bean class. In this bean class, you will configure the details about the advice bean. It means the bean which contains the advice code. You see, there is a property in this bean class called as advice. So that property will hold the advice object details. So what is the advice object here? The reference, we are configuring it here. Ref log advice means. So here we are saying that the bean whose ID is log advice is actually the advice here. Okay, it is actually the advice code. Yes, and here you'll find that you got patterns, property called as patterns. You see, you'll find that here in this patterns property, we'll use it to configure the details about, the target method. Okay, yes, we'll configure the details about the target method using the patterns. That means you won't apply the advice to which method, see get message. Okay, so if you got multiple methods, then you can add multiple values here. Okay, yes. That means the patterns is what type of property? We have discussed about it. When do we use list actually? What type of properties we use list? Yes. So what type of properties? To configure which type of properties we use list? Yes, the list element here. When do we use it? We have discussed about it, right? Come on here. When do we use list? in the properties of type array or in the properties of type list. The properties of type array or the properties of type list. Then in that case, we will use list element. We have discussed about it, right? Yeah. Fine. That means it indicates that this property is either array or list, which holds as method details for which you want to target it. This property holds the target method details for which you want to apply the advice. Yes. So get message is a method. Next, as I said, we need a proxy here, right? We need a proxy. You'll find that here we use this predefined bean class called as proxy factory bean to configure the proxy object details. Okay, yes. To configure the proxy object details, you configure the proxy object details. Here, you see, we want to create the proxy. The framework will create the proxy. But the thing is, you have to supply the details about the proxy object. Like, you want to create the proxy for which object. Yes. You have to provide those details. Yes. You have to configure the proxy object details here. Yes. So target object and all. So you got proxy factory bean. You see here, there is a property called as target in this proxy factory bean, which we use to configure the proxy object details, target object details. So what is the target object here? You want to create the proxy for which object? Example service. You want to create proxy object for the example service, right? Yeah. Okay, cool. See here, but for this example service being, for this target object, which advice code you want to execute? For this target object, you want to execute which advice code? Where is the advice code? Here, the advice details, all such details, you have configured them here in the regex point cut advisor. Okay, it holds all these details, right? Yes. Fine. See here, there is a property called as interceptor names. Using this name, you are providing the point cut advisor details, which holds the advice details and for which target methods you want to apply the advice. Those details are there, right? Yes. Okay. This is how it works. Fine. So now, what you do here, you take this proxy object. So you won't directly work with the target object now. That means with the example service. Instead, you will take a proxy which will be created for this target object. Okay, yes, you know the general meaning of proxy, right? Yes, yes. So here, that is the same proxy objects. You know, proxy objects are they act on behalf of another object actually. Proxy objects, they act on behalf of another object actually. Yes, they act on behalf of another object. So now you see here we have to obtain this proxy object. We have to obtain this proxy object. And then you have to call the method on the proxy. So when you do that, what happens? The proxy will check whether there is any device configured for this method, target method. So if it finds that there is an advice configured for the target method, what it does, simply it will call that advice code, it will execute that advice code first of all, then it will call the actual target method, then only it will call the actual target method here. That's it. Okay, yes, that is how it works. Okay, fine. You see here, now we will load the container and then see we are obtaining a bean. This bean ID, you see it is example service bean. Example service bean. Where is example service proxy, not bean? Sorry. Example service proxy. The ID is example service proxy, right? You see here, this is the ID. Actually, the proxy bean is ID is configured as example service proxy. So what you'll do here? Yes, you will actually obtain this example service proxy object. Okay, yes, you'll obtain this proxy object. Then you see here you are getting the proxy object reference. We are storing it in service reference variable. So example service implements this interface, right? Service interface. We are using that interface reference variable to store the object reference. Okay, yes. Fine. So once you got the proxy object reference, now you see you'll call the method. You see, now you will get the proxy object reference and you'll call that method, target method. So when you call the get message method here, what happens? You see, we are calling the proxy object method. So proxy object method will take this method call. It will check whether there is any advice configured. So if it finds that there is an advice configured, then simply what it does, first of all, it will execute that advice code. Then it will call the target method get message, the actual method get message, which is defined in the example service. Okay, that is how it works. So hope you got it. Fine. I'll run this code. You see, first of all, the advice code is executing. Then you see the target method executes, and when the target method executes, what it does is it will print this message, get message. Sorry, this message. That log message is displayed. It is printed by the log advice, and then you see this get message is printed by the advice. The target method The target method is the get message. That method has printed that message, and then you see here the target method will execute, and once it is done the execution, it returns the value accordingly, whatever it is supposed to do. So here, this way we can configure the advices for the cross-cutting concern code for a method. You see, yes, we will not call that advice code anywhere in the target method. Okay, we'll configure it externally. You see in the configuration file we have done that, right? Yes, that is how we'll be using it. Yes. Okay, fine. So here, there are a few things which you need to know regarding the advice. So who's calling this before method here? Let me see how many of you people understood. We'll call this advice method. We didn't call that advice method, right? How it is executing? Who's calling that advice method? Yes. Yes. Who's calling the advice method? It is before method. Who's invoking it? Yes, the proxy. That's right. The proxy is calling the advice method. You see, here, as I said, actually we are calling the target method get message. Sorry, we are calling the proxy method. We are obtaining a proxy object here, and we will call the get message method. You see, you're doing this. You will call this get message, and when this get message method is called, you see, this is proxy object method. Yes, you check this example, this image here, you'll understand. So you will find that here, you see, the application will be calling the proxy method get message. So the proxy, in this case, what it does, the proxy method will check whether there is any advice configured, and if it finds that there is an advice configured, first of all is equal that advice code, and you got the advice code defined in the before method, right? Yes. So that advice method or that advice code will execute. Okay. Yes, that advice code will execute. And once the advice code finishes execution, once the advice code finishes execution, here you see what happens. Again, the proxy will call the actual target method here. The proxy will call the actual target method. You see, the example service bean method will be invoked here. The example service bean method will be invoked here. Yes, that is how it works. Okay. Fine. So hope you people got it. And you know what? There are a few things which you need to know. When the proxy calls the target method, when the proxy invokes the target method, the proxy will pass all the method details, the target method details against it. You see, when the before method is called, the before method you see takes a method object. What is method object here? You see this method object actually it holds the details about the target method. It holds the details about the target method here. Okay, yes. It holds the details about the target method. Yes. Yeah. So that the object contains the target method details. So method object. Next, you see here, you will find that an object array is passed on to this method. An object array is actually passed on to this method. So what is this object array? Yes. What is stored in this object array? Yes. You'll find that in this object array, the arguments which are passed to the method are stored. Sometimes when you call the method, you pass some values, right? So they are nothing but we call them as arguments. So here, to the target method, when it is invoked, if you're passing any arguments, then those arguments, the details about those arguments are also passed on to this target method. You see, through this object, with object array, through the object array, see the details are stored in the object array, that object array is passed on here. Yes. And you see, yeah, the arguments are passed in this, stored in this object array, right? Yeah. Next thing here, the last parameter is the target object reference. Last thing here, we got target object reference. Yes. Okay. Yes. So this way, all the details about the method, okay, the target method will be passed on. All the details about the target method will be passed on. Yes, and they are stored. That you see, these details which are passed on here are actually used by that. Sorry, all these details are passed on to the advice method. I'm sorry, before method. So these details are passed on to this before method. That is advice method, right? Yes. So here you'll find that the advice method will use these details. The advice method will use this details to for different purposes. You say, I don't know, you see this just um, displaying the log details, right? Yes. As of now, this displaying the log details. So this displaying the method, it will read that method name from this method object itself. So which method is invoked, so that method object will hold the details. So it is reading that method details from that method object itself. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Next, you see, if you want, you can also read the arguments which are passed on to this method. They are stored in that object array. Okay. What if there are no arguments passed? Then you won't find any values in that object array. Okay, it will be blank. So in calling the method, if you're passing any values, so those values will be stored in the object array. Okay, the arguments. We call them as arguments, right? Values which are passed to the method you're calling it. Those values are actually known as arguments. Okay, fine. So hope you people got it. Now, what if I want to apply the advice before, sorry, after the method finishes execution? What to do? So I want to apply the advice after the method finishes execution. Yes. So then in that case, you have to implement another interface here. This advice class has to implement another interface. Yeah. So what is that interface? It is known as after returning. That interface is actually known as after, sorry, after returning. Yes. After returning advice. Yeah. Fine. You see, we'll go through that also. Just a minute. Now, this is this interface after returning advice. In this interface, you got a method called as after returning. You got a method called as after returning. Okay, yeah. So when this method is invoked, you see to this method again, the parameters are passed. These parameters are very much similar to the parameters which we saw in before method, but there is one small difference. What is it? Can you quickly tell me? You'll find that there is one additional parameter. Okay, let me explain it. You'll find that there is only one additional parameter. What is that? The first value. You see that first parameter is the additional parameter here. Yes. Actually, here, this parameter, it holds that return value of the target method. You see, we want the advice code to execute after the target method finishes execution, right? And sometimes you know that the methods may return a value. So whatever the value the method returns, that return value is actually stored in this target method. Sorry, in this parameter. The return value is stored in this parameter here. Yes. It is stored in this parameter, return value. Okay, yes. Okay. So that is one additional parameter which you got here. Yes. So this way it works. Okay. Yes. So but this code will execute after the target method finishes execution. This code will execute after the target method finishes execution. I'll run this code, you see. You see, first the get message method will invoke target method. Get message method is target method, right? So that method is invoked. Then that advice code is executed here. Yes. That is the difference. Okay. Hope you people got it. So similarly, there are other types of advisors. We'll discuss about it in detail in the next class. Okay. So I'll stop it here today.